It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Adam Dahl. Like many others in our community, Adam Dahl is a transplant to Lexington. He's originally from Union, Kentucky, Boone County, about 60 miles north. He began attending University of Kentucky in 2007, and in October of his freshman year, he met his wife, Brittany, and the rest is history, as they say. 2 children, 12 years of marriage later. Adam and family have settled into Lexington nicely, and he's watching his favorite teams, anything UK or Minnesota Vikings. Where does that come from? I'll let you explain. Sometimes in heartbreaking fashion. You can find him spending time with his family or on the golf course with friends. After more than a decade in advertising and marketing, working at both local ad agency and at LEX 18, Adam opened up his own business in 2023 called Dahlhus Fudge, where he makes more than 45 flavors by hand every day. God has blessed him abundantly, and he's thankful every day to get to lead a life rich in fulfillment and love and candy. And as a side note, I had to ask Adam, are you related to former Central member Ann Dahl? Some of you might remember her. She was pretty prominent here, and she left, moved to Florida. But he is not related. She couldn't. She was even from northern Kentucky, but no connection there. Anyway, it's my pleasure now to introduce Adam Dahl.
Does that work? Is that close enough? All right. First of all, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to Reverend Gilvin and the men of Central for inviting me to speak this morning. Very humbled and honored to be here. I'm just kind of a normal guy, so it's nice to get to kind of share my story and introduce myself to you all. You'll have to forgive me a little bit. This is my first men's breakfast. Normally, I'm working Monday through Saturday at the shop, so I don't normally get to come here, so to be invited to speak is awesome, and I'm very glad to tell my story. And in that vein, when he asked me to speak, I really didn't know what to say, because I was like, do we just kind of talk off the cuff? Is this more of a conversation? Do we have a theme, or do I just kind of tell my testimony? And luckily, you sent me some questions to kind of guide my conversation today, and I kind of landed on maybe telling a little bit of my testimony and a little bit about myself, because I think it does kind of answer those questions quite a bit, but also give you all a little bit of insight of who I am to get to introduce myself to you all. But as I was thinking about it, it's not necessarily the easiest story for me to tell. Aside from the people who kind of lived it with me, the only people who really know the story are licensed therapists. So if I get a bill from Central this morning, I understand. But the people who do know the story kind of commonly ask one question, and that's, how are you here? And that's not a, what brought you here? How did you make it? How are you standing in front of us today? It's literally, how are you here? How are you not an addict? How are you not an abuser? How are you not in jail? How are you alive? The answer to those questions is really because of 3 men in my life, which gives me a perfect opportunity to talk about them this morning. And anytime I get the chance to talk about them, I will. The first was my grandpa Don. Not my birth grandpa. My birth grandpa died in 1987 before I was born, but he's somebody who stepped into my life many times when I didn't have a father figure. The second person will be my dad, Randy. Struggled quite a bit in his life, but definitely taught me a lot as I was growing up and getting older. And the third person, of course, is my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I wouldn't know him a bit if I didn't have the first two men in my life. So to talk about them, I don't want to get too much in the minutia of the details because, again, it might be a little bit hard for me to talk about, but kind of have to go back a little bit to the beginning of my life. And like you said, I'm originally from just north of Cincinnati in a little place called Fairfield. If you're not familiar with Fairfield, maybe you're familiar with Jungle Gyms, which is right there. I spend a lot of time, I don't know if they still have it there or not, but the animatronic Elvis, I used to sit in front of him constantly while my mom shopped for Lord knows what in that place. But grew up, my parents divorced when I was 2, just after my youngest brother was born. I'm the middle of 3 boys. And my parents, an absolute hatred for one another. I don't remember a kind word, a positive glance, a good experience with either of them together in my whole life. So after the divorce, we weren't really allowed to see my dad at all. He broke his back in a motorcycle accident when he was 18 and turned to alcohol as a way of coping. So he was a pretty hard alcoholic. So we weren't really allowed to see him whatsoever. And for a boy, not to have his dad, that's tough. That's almost impossible. So in stepped my grandpa Don. He really came around and helped shape our lives before my stepdad entered the picture. But my grandpa Don was a strong man of faith, very successful Christian businessman in Cincinnati. He was the president of the Cincinnati chapter of the International Fellowship of Christian Businessmen, which was great because we got to watch him speak and run that organization for quite some time. But what he would do was he would come over a couple times a week with me and my 2 brothers, and we would have Bible study. And it was really my first introduction to Jesus because we really didn't go to church at all. My mom was and is not really a person of faith. So to have him come into our lives was great. And where it really came to a head was as a boy, again, I'm missing my dad. So I was almost inconsolable most nights because I wanted to see my father. So to cope with that a little bit, my mom started letting me call him every night. I'd have, 4 or 5 years old, just quick conversations. Hey, Dad, how's it going? I'm doing great at school, love you, miss you, that sort of thing. Well, one night, happened to call him, and he said, hey, what are you doing? I said, well, Grandpa's over at the house, and we're praying. And he said, oh, yeah? What for? And I said, we're praying that you get better so that we can see you. Excuse me. He decided in that minute to get sober. Didn't touch alcohol again. Without my grandpa and without the love of Jesus in my life, he wouldn't have gotten sober. I wouldn't have had a relationship with him. Excuse me, fast forward quite a bit. My mom gets remarried to my stepdad and we moved to northern Kentucky. Of course, that makes it quite difficult to have visitation with your dad 45 minutes away, a couple times a week, which did away with that. We still got to see him every other weekend, which is so nice. I got to have a relationship with my dad, which is great. However, that hatred for one another turned us into pawns against each other. We were used quite a bit to prove the other one wrong. And living in my house with my mom and my stepdad has 2 boys, so now I'm the middle of 5. And in that house, we were not wanted. We were less than. We were not the same. We were not created the same as the other 2 boys in that house. And growing up with that, incredibly difficult. There's no place to go to escape. My older brother, Jason, when we moved, was his freshman year of high school. So, of course, you're 14. You've known all your friends in Fairfield your whole life. You moved to northern Kentucky. You don't know anybody. You don't want to move. So he started acting out quite a bit. The fighting between my mom and my brother constantly made it even worse. The day my brother turned 18, he didn't come home from school. He decided he's done. So he moved in with his girlfriend, finished out his senior year, moved on. What that did for me was put a lot more pressure on me, because now my mom goes, I'm not going to have him do that. I'm going to put a lot more pressure on him. So now my house becomes hell even more. I thank God, never physically abused or anything like that, but the psychological abuse of being treated as less than is hard when you're 14, 15. So I decide I'm just going to get myself out. 16 years old, I decided to move in with my dad. I drove every day from Fairfield to my school in northern Kentucky. I'd wake up at 5:30, drive down, pick up my brother, go to school, wrestling practice after school, go to work, get back home at about 11 p.m., go to bed and do it all over again. God loved my dad. Not the best dad. He doesn't know how to raise a kid. He's never had to before. So at 16 years old, I've got a 50-year-old roommate, which is nice because there's food in the fridge at least, but had to get a job, had to make sure I'm covering for myself and making sure I'm responsible. But growing up at 16 is not something that I would ask my kids to do. The great part about living with my dad, though, was I got a really good friend. And again, that's a relationship that I wouldn't have without the love of Jesus Christ in my life and the influence of my grandpa Don. However, when I was 18, my mom used me as a way to get me back in the house because it was too dangerous for me to be driving on 75. So standing in front of a judge, pleading my case, but unfortunately I'm forced to move back into the house at 18. Now, I think those few years is great. I'm doing fine. The thing that I forgot about was I left a little brother behind. Now, how that my older brother leaving compacted on me, imagine that 2 times over on him. Fast forward a little bit, I get to graduate. I'm down at school again. I meet my wife, which is fantastic. Love her so much. Going through college, a few years, things are going well. My little brother comes down to UK, so now I get to watch after him, which is great. And I think we made it out. This is great. Things are going well for us. Until one night when I come home from work and I get a phone call. And it's Good Sam. One of my brothers has attempted to take his own life. So I go as a young person in town to go see him, to go make sure he's okay. Excuse me. And as I'm holding him, and he's weeping and I'm sobbing uncontrollably, he's telling me, you left me there. You left me there. I was on my own. I didn't have anybody. Come to find out that wasn't the only time he tried to do that. And I wasn't there. And the only reason he's still here, and he still even made it to that point, was because he couldn't find the shotgun shells. That's it. But now, because we're together, because of our relationship with God, we're able to support one another, to push each other through, to make sure that we're both the successful Christian men that our grandpa Don set us out to be. Unfortunately, we lost our grandpa in 2019. He was 93, so he lived a pretty long, successful life. And we were happy that he's no longer suffering after long battles with health. But in 2022, about this time, I was coming home from a meeting in Louisville when I got a phone call from, I don't even remember, Bethesda, I think up in Cincinnati. My dad's hooked up to a vent. they're about to start ECMO, which if you're familiar with anything related to ECMO, you go on ECMO, you don't really come off. So I'm flabbergasted, like, wait, what's going on? My dad had been sick a couple days prior, and we were going to, I think he was just going to go to urgent treatment, get a swab or something, get some medicine, get some rest, and come back and see me in a week or two. But 24 hours later, I'm getting a phone call that he's hooked up to a ventilator, and they're about to start dialysis and then ECMO. So I don't understand what's happening. I leave my meeting, pack up all my stuff, call my wife, and head up to Cincinnati. Less than 24 hours after that, my dad died. And I've been kind of living in a fog for the last few years. When you lose a compass for your life, somebody that helped you grow, turn you into the person you are, and you lose two of those very important men, I had no choice but to turn to the third. God is the only reason that I'm standing here moderately composed, and able to even tell this story. Because without Jesus Christ, even the hardships, there's no point. My dad, going through 30 years of sobriety at AA, he would always have a lot of these sayings. Of course, with Alcoholics Anonymous, you're anonymous. So everybody's got a nickname. Everybody's got kind of a little thing that makes them who they are, that identifies them away from what their actual identity is. And my dad was always somebody that, he ran the AA center that he was at. He was a figurehead for 30 years. We kind of joked because there's a bench outside that's got kind of a little groove in it. My dad wasn't a small person at all. There was kind of a little groove in it where he would always sit after the meetings and just kind of hold court out there with the people that would come out. And there were a couple things that he would always, just these mantras that he would pound into our heads. The first was pound the rock, which we always kind of joke about, my brothers and I. We just kind of joke about it. To us, it just meant shut up and get back to work, which we needed. It was, hey, there's a lot going on around you. Shut up and get back to work. You continue your schoolwork. You continue to just be a good person. Good things will happen. Just pound the rock. Keep going. But the second thing is what I kind of want to leave you all with today. And he would say, spread the message, not the mess. We, as Christian men, hold the responsibility to spread the message. Spread the message of love, of acceptance, spread the message of accountability, and leave the mess for God. The mess of anger, intolerance. Let God handle that. If you're able to do that, you can push through almost anything. And if anybody's a testament to that, I guess maybe I am. I don't know. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for inviting me. Hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you.